Whitney Houston's voice was her claim to fame, and it was her moneymaker.
There was no one else on the scene like her at the time. She had this 5-octave range voice. She was making hits and breaking records with her music.
I didn't plan to have things, me sell 6 million copies first time.
She got a $100 million recording contract.
But she began to make some very, very bad personal and career decisions.
It's a terrible tragedy what happened to her.
When Whitney Houston died, it was an enormous shock.
After Whitney died, the first thing everyone wants to know is, what was she worth?
Some people thought it was $20 million.
Whitney's mother and her aunts did not feel comfortable with the way the distribution was.
She made the will with Bobby Brown shortly after the birth of their daughter, Bobbi Kristina.
The concern was Bobby Brown might go after Bobbi Kristina's money.
This was a huge, huge bone of contention among the family.
What was going to happen with this multi-million-dollar estate?
When a celebrity checks out, there's no shortage of people ready to cash in. There's a ton of money to be made on the backs of dead celebrities, and with millions of dollars at stake, the battles over the estates of the rich and famous can lead to some serious drama. This is the story of how singer Whitney Houston's legendary career was built on her image of the girl next door with the golden voice, and how the pressures of fame caused the image to crack and ultimately chip away at her wealth, well-being, and ultimately, in the end, shatter into tragedy. On February 12, 2012, the 54th Annual Grammy Awards are slated to take place in Los Angeles. For the music industry, it's one of the biggest nights of the year.
Everybody who's anybody turns up at the Grammy Awards.
Pop legend Whitney Houston will also be attending. The troubled pop diva and actress is in the midst of another career revival. She has just wrapped on her latest film project, Sparkle, and it appears she has her drug problem finally under control. Word is she is looking forward to making new music with Clive Davis, the Arista Records producer who'd launched her career when she was a teenager.
Whitney Houston was making some headway in getting better. So much so that Whitney Houston was going to have a featured spot at the Grammys party that Clive throws every year, and at the Grammys themselves.
The night before the Grammys, Whitney is preparing to attend Davis's pre-Grammy party at the Beverly Hilton Hotel when something alarming happens.
Whitney is a no-show to Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy party. It's red alert.
Whitney Houston was underwater and apparently unconscious when she was pulled from a Beverly Hills, California hotel bathtub. A member of her entourage found the 48-year-old singer in her 4th-floor hotel room. She was pronounced dead that afternoon.
When Whitney Houston died, it was an enormous shock.
This was like this absolute, utter tragedy.
While Grammy organizers scramble to produce a tribute to Whitney Houston's life, speculation about her estate is rampant.
When Whitney died, her net worth was uncertain. Some people thought she was worth $20 million, some people thought she was broke.
It's believed Whitney owns a home in New Jersey and a home in Atlanta, which together are worth approximately $2.58 million. Whitney had previously owned a house in Florida, which she sold for $1.35 million back in 2005, and a home in the Atlanta suburb Alpharetta, which she sold in 2007 for $1.19 million. She also owned a Rolls-Royce Silver Spur limousine and a jewelry collection that includes a diamond-studded gold Rolex and her engagement ring, worth an estimated $250,000, which she leaves for her daughter, Bobbi Kristina. Also, it's believed Whitney had accumulated millions as a legendary music artist. A day after her untimely passing, Whitney's greatest hits album shoots to #1 on several music charts, including iTunes and Amazon.
When a celebrity passes away, the world still wants more. And every little piece that they can get from that celebrity, they want. And that's why record sales were going through the roof.
So the next big source of speculation is who is going to inherit Whitney's estate and her sizable debt.
She owed over $11 million in back taxes.
Whitney was once married to singer Bobbi Brown. But after 15 turbulent years, they were divorced in 2007. It is suspected that their only child, 19-year-old Bobbi Kristina, will be Whitney's primary heir.
But people start to speculate that Bobbi Brown might have a hand in some of this fortune.
The will that went through the probate court was actually a will from 1993. She never updated the will after her divorce from Bobbi Brown. This is a big no-no.
This is an unwelcome possibility, given that many, including members of Whitney's inner circle, blame Bobbi Brown for Whitney's troubles for much of her adult life.
We know Bobbi Brown was living off of Whitney Houston during her lifetime, so the concern was he might then go after Bobbi Kristina's money.
Whitney Houston was considered the voice, and her soaring instrument was her ticket to stardom. But how did she go from a Jersey girl to become, according to the Guinness World Records, the most awarded female artist of all time?
I didn't plan to have things, me sell 6 million copies the first time, and the second time, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, it's going to happen. We just, Arista and myself just played it right. We obviously did the right things, and that's success.
Whitney Elizabeth Houston was born in New Jersey on August 9th, 1963.
Whitney Houston was born into a musical family and a religious family. Her mother, Cece Houston, was a backup singer for many pop, rock, and R&B artists in the 60s and 70s. She was an incredible talent and gospel singer.
Whitney's cousin on her maternal side is Dionne Warwick, and she calls Aretha Franklin her honorary aunt. But Whitney's first big career break didn't come in music.
Whitney Houston began her career as a model. Most people don't realize that. It was her beauty that initially attracted people.
At 16 years old, Whitney Houston is scouted by Click Modeling Agency. Then she makes the cover of 17 magazine.
It was so incredible to see a young Black woman who looks like me on the cover of a mainstream magazine. It meant everything because it meant that the world was beginning to see us as beautiful.
Whitney's modeling career really pays off, earning an average of $100 an hour. But music is Whitney's true path, and she's been preparing for her big break for years.
Whitney Houston began singing in church, and she also was singing background on albums with her mother. So she had lots of professional or nearly professional experience before she ever got her record deal.
The person responsible for first signing Whitney would be none other than the legendary head of Arista Records, Clive Davis.
And the fact that he put down $250,000 as an investment in her career tells you how much he thought she could succeed.
Davis's investment pays off. Whitney's self-titled debut album, Whitney Houston, is released on March 14, 1985. The album logs 14 weeks at the top of the Billboard 200, and her single, Saving All My Love for You, tops the Hot 100, becoming Houston's first #1 hit.
That record would not stop. It just wouldn't go away. It had the right songs at the right time. She was good looking, and she became a giant MTV star.
She will go on to score 7 consecutive #1s on the Billboard Hot 100, setting a record that she still holds today.
She was destined for success.
In February 1986, Whitney wins Best Female Pop Performance at the Grammy Awards. Her Greatest Love World Tour is one of the most successful tours of the year. It sells over 285,000 tickets for a gross of $4.83 million from just 24 North American dates.
Whitney Houston's voice was her claim to fame, and it was her moneymaker.
There was no one else on the scene like her at the time, so she really had an impact in a way that no other artist at that time had.
On June 2nd, 1987, Houston's second album, Whitney, comes out. She makes history as the first female artist to enter the Billboard 200 at #1 and holds the top spot for 11 weeks.
In 1987, Whitney Houston out-earned Michael Jackson, who was near the peak of his career. Whitney earned $44 million. Michael only earned $43 million. That's how big Whitney Houston was.
At that time, Whitney's father, John Houston, takes a role in managing her career. Whitney is also about to make her first big investment.
In 1987, Whitney made her first big purchase, a home in New Jersey. It wasn't just any home.
It had a unique circular design that some thought resembled a UFO.
She also had custom closets, tennis courts, a swimming pool, 5 bedrooms. She ended up building this house for a mere $2.7 million.
Whitney's next big construction project will be her image. At the 1989 Soul Train Awards, she meets Bobbi Brown.
Bobby Brown was the quintessential bad boy.
He would get in fights, he got DUIs. Rumor was one of the reasons that Whitney found him attractive is she wanted to get rid of that clean image that she had, that squeaky clean image, and Bobbi Brown was a great way to do that.
Bobbi Brown was a member of the R&B group New Edition, but he had gone solo by the late 1980s.
He was an enormous pop star based upon his first solo album. I mean, really, everybody thought that he was going to be the next Michael Jackson.
But Whitney's relationship with Bobbi Brown will eventually contribute to her creative and financial downfall. But another man will first take her career to its absolute peak. When superstar singer Whitney Houston dies just a day before the 2012 Grammy Awards, the world is shocked and saddened.
The world was really waiting for Whitney Houston to have her big comeback. And it was really, really unexpected, shocking and surprising that she was found dead in her bathtub.
According to the autopsy, Houston had used cocaine just probably immediately prior to drowning.
It's a terrible tragedy what happened to her.
When Whitney Houston passed away, there were so many questions.
One being the value of the late singer's estate.
Whitney's financial worth was in question. Some people thought it was $20 million, and even that amount was low considering her iconic stature. Other people thought she was broke.
But in the months following Whitney's death, questions about the value of her estate arise immediately. According to Forbes magazine, her greatest hits album sold 64,000 copies in one day and 818,000 copies in the US in the first 6 months of 2012.
She was so beloved by so many fans around the world for her music.
Whitney leaves behind her 19-year-old daughter, Bobbi Kristina, who she had with ex-husband Bobby Brown. Soon after her death, the details of her final will and testament are made public and puts speculation that Bobby Brown may be entitled to a portion of it finally to rest.
There was a reference to Bobby Brown, but because he was divorced and no longer Whitney's spouse, he wasn't entitled to anything. So let's be clear, Bobby Brown got no money from Whitney Houston.
Instead, it will be Whitney's 19-year-old daughter, Bobbi Kristina, who will inherit her fortune. But Whitney's family still have concerns about Bobby Brown's influence.
Bobbi Kristina's mental state was not good after her mom passed away. And some people were concerned that Bobby Brown was going to try and seek conservatorship over Bobbi Kristina so he could manage her financial life.
But back in 1991, Whitney and Bobby Brown were in love and engaged to be married when the singer raps on her first starring role in a movie.
Kevin Costner is famously known for championing her for this role. To his credit, he held off for a year while she was on tour so that she could be a part of this movie.
After Whitney finishes shooting The Bodyguard, on July 18, 1992, she and Bobby Brown get married at her home in New Jersey. But the marriage of good girl Whitney to bad boy Brown had many scratching their heads.
But she and Bobby, as much as people thought that they were apples and oranges, they were two peas in a pod, really. The idea that she was this pop princess is very much out of line with how she grew up. She was a girl from the hood.
But prior to their wedding, Brown signed a prenuptial agreement with his superstar fiancé.
In this agreement, Bobby gave up the full right to any kind of spousal support. They also kept all their property separate, even works that Whitney would develop during their marriage. And Bobby was okay with this.
4 months after their marriage, on November 5th, 1992, The Bodyguard is released, and it makes Whitney Houston a global superstar.
The Bodyguard comes out, and it is a massive worldwide hit. It makes $106 million worldwide.
What was really phenomenal about The Bodyguard was the music. It was always the music.
The Bodyguard soundtrack features the single I Will Always Love You, originally written and performed by country superstar Dolly Parton. Houston's version becomes a massive worldwide hit.
I Will Always Love You is probably the signature Whitney Houston song, but the person that made all the money from that is Dolly Parton.
As the sole writer, Parton receives all the publishing royalties. In 2012 alone, she pockets more than $70,000 after the song is downloaded 195,000 times in the week following Whitney's death.
So Dolly Parton benefited greatly financially from that.
Whitney will earn the bulk of her fortune from touring. Soon after the birth of her daughter, Bobbi Kristina, on March 4th, 1993, Whitney heads out on the Bodyguard tour.
Bobbi Kristina never really left Whitney's side. She went on tour with her. Everything Whitney did, she had Bobbi Kristina with her.
The Bodyguard tour runs from July 1993 to September 1994 and sells 225,657 tickets and grosses $10,503,000 from just 28 North American dates.
She was making hits and breaking records with her music. She was breaking records with her image. She took over the 90s, really.
But trouble is beginning to brew in the superstar's marriage.
While Whitney Houston was busy breaking box office records and album sales, her husband Bobby Brown was breaking some records of his own with the law.
In April 1994, Brown is arrested and charged with beating up a bar patron at a nightclub in Orlando, Florida.
Bobby Brown was known for his temper. He had a number of run-ins with the law, a number of drug issues, and it was bad for not only her career, but also her well-being.
She knew that it was very hard for Bobby to be Mr. Whitney Houston. And I think that that played a huge role in their marriage, and I think it played a huge role in Whitney getting more and more into drugs.
It's been alleged that Whitney first dabbled in drugs as a teenager. By the mid-90s, Whitney is a frequent user of both cocaine and marijuana.
As her problems with drugs deepened and the relationship with Bobby Brown worsened, she began to make some very, very bad personal and career decisions.
In January 2000, Whitney is found with a half an ounce of marijuana at the airport while leaving Hawaii.
She wasn't actually arrested. She wasn't cuffed or anything at the airport. In fact, she was allowed to get back on the plane, but she was ultimately charged with marijuana possession.
Even though it was marijuana, it was still in association with drugs, and that tarnished her image at that time.
But Whitney's pop princess image gets a cleanup when she re-signs with Arista Records.
In August 2001, Whitney Houston made history. She got a $100 million recording contract, breaking all previous records. Now, she didn't get all this money at once. She got a $25 million advance, and the next $75 million was going to be based on her album sales.
But it didn't do anything to change her behavior.
In celebration, Whitney and Bobby spend massive amounts of money on drugs.
Over a 60-day period in 2001, Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston allegedly spent over $150,000 on cocaine.
I think that Whitney Houston's problem was so bad, and there was no one around her, not even her mother, who could get her to take a real hard look at herself and begin to solve the problems.
The tabloids continue to have a field day when Whitney appears at a tribute concert for Michael Jackson on September 7th, 2001.
Whitney's drug use really starts to become apparent in just her physicality. She's looking so skinny and frail. Her performances are subpar at best.
It's an absolutely sad and pathetic spectacle.
When Whitney Houston is found drowned in a hotel bathtub with cocaine in her system, it sets off a firestorm of speculation about her fortune.
When Whitney Houston died, the expectation was that she was sitting on a giant pile of cash. That wasn't the case. She had a lot of debt.
But 9 months later, increased sales of her music reportedly takes her estate out of the red and into the black, with an estimated value of $20 million.
Even that number seems low for someone who is the most award-winning female singer in history to date.
Whitney's sole heir is her only child, Bobbi Kristina Brown.
Bobbi Kristina was going to get 10% of the money at the age of 21, a sixth of the money at the age of 25, and the balance at the age of 30. But even though Whitney spaced this money out, it was still an astounding amount of money.
$20 million is a lot for a 19-year-old.
Family and friends worry it will have a negative effect on Bobbi Kristina's life.
When you give someone that much money, what happens? There could be gambling, there could be drug use, there could be crazy shopping sprees, there could be bad investments, and this was just the beginning. I mean, Whitney Houston's estate could go up exponentially over the next decade.
Back in 2001, Whitney Houston has just signed one of the biggest record deals in history for $100 million. But that's not what's making headlines.
This becomes the era where Whitney becomes tabloid fodder. Basically, every headline is about Whitney's drug problem and not about her voice.
The National Enquirer publishes an interview with Whitney and Bobbi Brown's alleged drug dealer, in which he claims they'd spent $750,000 on cocaine over the past decade.
Quite possible. Quite possible.
It seems that sometimes the more money that you have, the more ability you have to access these illicit drugs.
In 2002, Whitney becomes embroiled in a battle over her financial fortune when her own father sues her for $100 million.
Her father, John, was her manager for a very long time. He made an allegation that she owed him money from some of the legal fees that she incurred for the Hawaii arrest, and also that she had not paid him some profits to which he was entitled.
John Houston also files an injunction requiring Whitney to place 20% of her earnings in a trust. He's worried about her drug abuse and wants to make sure she's protected from becoming destitute.
Whitney was completely devastated by the fact of the lawsuit and then had to deal with the fact that he died while the lawsuit was still ongoing.
The public's curiosity about Whitney's drug use continues, as evident when she sits down with ABC journalist Diane Sawyer on December 4th, 2002, just days before the release of her latest album, Just Whitney.
Now, this may have been done to help her career, but the benefit of what the interview did is really questionable. It was really hard to watch. Whitney Houston was defensive, her voice was cracking. That phrase, crack is whack, ends up really making its mark throughout the world.
Despite the controversy, her album, Just Whitney, debuts on the Billboard charts on December 10th, 2002, selling over 200,000 copies in the first week. But sales plummet instantly. It will end up being the worst-selling album of her career. In 2003, Whitney cuts the salaries of the family members on her payroll by half, and then turns around and moves to Atlanta with Bobbi Brown and Bobbi Kristina, purchasing a 6,633 square foot house with 5 bedrooms and 7 baths for $1.3 million. And then 2 years later, Whitney Houston shows up where everyone least expects her.
The most bizarre moment in Whitney Houston's career is when she turns up on a reality TV show.
The reality series, being Bobbi Brown, had a 10-episode run. Right out of the gate, first night, it gets 1 million viewers.
Seeing her on Being Bobbi Brown was a totally different person. It was really surprising and a little disturbing, too.
She's rail thin. She looks tired. The interaction between the two of them, it's a train wreck.
No one is surprised when on September 2006, Whitney Houston serves Bobbi Brown with divorce papers.
After about 15 years of being together, Whitney had had enough. She had enough of the hard partying. She had enough of the domestic disputes.
But their divorce proceedings reveal Whitney's current financial situation.
We actually learned that Whitney was $4 million in debt. She had a $300,000 life insurance policy, $225,000 in stock, and just $40,000 in cash.
Bobbi Brown tries to overturn the terms of the divorce in an effort to get alimony.
Despite this prenuptial agreement, Bobby allegedly did try to get spousal support at some point, but he was not entitled to it.
The years of Whitney supporting Bobby Brown were gone.
Whitney has her own money problem she is worried about.
So she sells their big house in Alpharetta, Georgia at a loss of over $1.1 million. She then purchases a townhouse cross town, much smaller than the big house in Alpharetta, for about $500,000.
But just as Whitney's latest legal and financial troubles are resolved, another pops up when her deceased father's second wife sues Whitney over a life insurance policy.
When Whitney's dad passed away, she ended up receiving a $1 million life insurance policy. Of course, her stepmother didn't think that she was entitled to that policy.
Whitney countersues, claiming that her father's life insurance policy was to repay a loan she had given him to purchase his condo, and was still owed most of the principal and all the interest when he died.
She ended up countersuing, saying not only was that money hers, but on top of that, her stepmother owed her $1.6 million for the mortgage plus interest.
Whitney's countersuit inspires rumors that she is broke and is in desperate need of money.
She'd spent a fortune and she hadn't been earning much. She hadn't really been on the road making much money, and her records weren't selling.
Whitney denies she is broke. But in 2009, she puts her New Jersey mansion up for sale for $2.5 million. But when there are no offers, she's forced to take it off the market. Strapped for cash, Whitney goes back out on the road. From February to June 2010, she embarks on the Nothing But Love tour. It's touted as her comeback tour.
Unfortunately, problems still followed Whitney, and she still found trouble. She was an addict, and she had a problem.
And her biggest, Whitney's once golden voice, is now gone. In a performance in Sydney, Australia, Whitney Houston's voice is clearly cracking, and the crowd reacts with jeers. Her performance will have far-reaching effects. After it's viewed on the internet, many believe that Whitney's once legendary career may be over, and it will negatively impact her tour's ticket sales, causing approximately $2 million in losses for the Australian promoter.
It was obvious on this tour that her voice was completely shot.
And Whitney's troubles keep coming, when in 2011, the National Enquirer publishes shocking photographs of 17-year-old Bobbi Kristina.
It's an image of Bobbi Kristina doing cocaine. This was devastating to Whitney. The last thing that Whitney Houston wanted was for the life of her daughter to parallel hers.
That same year, Whitney goes to Detroit to shoot her latest movie. Set in the 1960s, Sparkle is a remake of one of Whitney's favorite films, depicting the struggles of three musical sisters. Whitney plays the girl's mother, and ironically, the eldest daughter suffers from a cocaine addiction. By all reports, the shoot goes well. According to her producing partner, Whitney was sober and at her very best, inspiring both the cast and crew. And a month later, Whitney gets good news about the lawsuit with her father's second wife.
Winning this lawsuit wasn't only a personal win for Whitney, but it also was an economic win and brings some money into her own bank accounts.
Things are looking up for Whitney. As the 2012 Grammys approach, she is reported to be in good spirits. No one is prepared for the shocking news of her death the night before the Grammy Awards.
The way that Whitney Houston died could not have been more dramatic.
Apparently, she had drowned in her own bathtub. Nobody expected this.
When Whitney Houston, the platinum-selling singer with the golden voice, dies the day before the 2012 Grammy Awards, the cause of death sends shockwaves around the world.
It was really, really unexpected, shocking, and surprising that she was found dead in her bathtub the night of the Clive Davis pre-Grammy party.
According to authorities, Whitney is found in her room at the Beverly Hilton Hotel by her bodyguard.
Let me paint you a picture. There was an open bottle of beer, an unopened bottle of champagne, and on the counter, there was a spoon with what later the coroner would describe filled with a white, crystal-like substance.
Paramedics spend close to 20 minutes trying to revive the fallen pop star, but to no avail. Whitney's only child is in shock.
Bobbi Kristina was hysterical. She was so inconsolable that she needed to be taken to the hospital. You can only imagine how she felt to lose her mom. The two were so close, and this was so unexpected.
The official cause of death is accidental drowning, with the contributing factors of heart disease and cocaine use. The autopsy states Whitney Houston used cocaine just probably immediately prior to drowning.
There was no reason to believe that this was an act that was intentional. Whitney Houston did not want to die on February 11, 2012.
As the world mourns her death, Whitney's posthumous music sales steadily increase, and the value of her estate rises to an estimated $20 million.
The interest in Whitney Houston's music could not have been at a higher level. And of course, the sales of all of her music went through the roof.
According to Whitney's final will, her sole heir is her daughter Bobbi Kristina. The will stipulates she is to receive 10% of the estate, or $2 million, when she turns 21. She'll get another 15%, or roughly $2.7 million, when she turns 25, and the remainder on her 30th birthday.
Despite the fact that Whitney's will was quite clear in how the money was supposed to be paid to Bobbi Kristina, Whitney's mother and Bobbi Kristina's aunt did not feel comfortable with the way the distribution was. They were actually worried that Bobbi Kristina was a little too wild. Having Bobbi Kristina come into all this money, even though it wasn't in a lump sum, was very concerning to them. They actually went to the court and tried to have that changed.
Whitney's mother and sister-in-law argue that Bobbi Kristina is a highly visible target for those who would exert undue influence over her inheritance.
Undue influence basically means that someone's going to come in and you're susceptible to their influence and they're going to take advantage of you. But before the court could make a decision, they actually withdrew their petition. But just by them filing this petition, you saw how concerned they were about Bobbi Kristina being unduly influenced and vulnerable to others.
3 months after Whitney's untimely death, Bobbi Kristina and her family, including her grandmother, Sissy, begin filming a reality series for Lifetime called The Houstons on Our Own. When the show airs in October, viewers are introduced to a character who would ultimately play a big part in Bobbi Kristina's life: Nick Gordon.
Bobbi Kristina wound up turning her attention to Nick Gordon, who was a part of her family in the strangest way.
Bobbi Kristina is in this very strange relationship with her sort of adoptive brother. And eventually, this platonic brother and sister relationship turns romantic.
And now Bobbi Kristina, who's inheriting millions and millions of dollars, all of a sudden is in a relationship with Nick Gordon, who didn't have the best reputation.
Nick Gordon has been arrested multiple times in Atlanta for speeding and driving under the influence.
All of Whitney Houston's family members were very concerned about the Bobbi Kristina-Nick Gordon relationship.
That includes her father, Bobby Brown. But she is undeterred, and soon Gordon is living with her in the Atlanta home she inherits from her mother.
She came to rely on him, and that didn't turn out very well for her.
Just a few months before she receives the first $2 million of her inheritance, Bobbi Kristina Brown reportedly marries Nick Gordon. She posts a photo on social media showing the couple wearing rings.
In some ways, Nick Gordon is to Bobbi Kristina what Bobby Brown was to Whitney Houston. Because we see Bobbi Kristina getting more and more wild, engaging in more and more bad behavior, doing more and more drugs, all while Nick Gordon is around.
And on January 31st, 2015, it would ultimately end in tragedy.
Tragedy strikes the Houston family again when they find Bobbi Kristina in the bathroom, in the bathtub, unconscious.
Nick Gordon calls 911, and when paramedics arrive, Bobbi Kristina is resuscitated and transported to the hospital. She's found to have morphine, cocaine, alcohol, and prescription drugs in her body. She is placed in a medically induced coma and put on a ventilator.
The fact that she was found unconscious in a bathroom, much like her mother, is hard to believe. It was so similar that it just gives you the chills to think about.
Family members are in shock, and all eyes turn to her husband, Nick Gordon.
One thing the family had grave concerns about is, why did this happen in the first place? Is Nick Gordon behind all of this? God forbid, if something did happen to Bobbi Kristina, who would inherit Whitney Houston's millions? Was it going to be Nick Gordon? What was going to happen with this multi-million-dollar estate?
3 years after Whitney Houston's shocking death, her only child, Bobbi Kristina Brown, lies in the hospital on life support in a medically induced coma.
In what can only be described as a cruel twist of fate, on January 31st, 2015, Bobbi Kristina was found unconscious in a bathtub. Unlike her mother, Whitney Houston, she was not dead in that bathtub, but she was unconscious.
Bobbi Kristina is the sole heir to Whitney's estimated $20 million estate. She received the first installment of her trust fund in the amount of $2 million in 2014 when she turned 21 years old.
The next payment was going to be when Bobbi Kristina reached the age of 25. And the final payment, the rest of the money, was when she was 30.
Her grandmother, Cissy Houston, and her aunt and appointed guardian, Pat Houston, worry that Bobbi Kristina would be prey to unscrupulous people who were after her fortune. One of those people is a man that Bobbi Kristina calls her husband on social media.
Bobbi Kristina is in this relationship with a guy named Nick Gordon. He's known as sort of like an adopted brother, and eventually this relationship turns romantic.
And eventually, volatile.
They fight a lot, there's a lot of emotion and a lot of chaos. This is troubling to everyone around them.
Nick had a very checkered past. They thought that the relationship between him and Whitney's daughter would escalate into more drug use.
Nick Gordon's involvement in the circumstances surrounding Bobbi Kristina's hospitalization has the media in an uproar.
Supposedly, Nick Gordon was trying to give Bobbi Kristina CPR and resuscitate her. But on the other hand, there were reports that he was the cause of her being unconscious in the bathtub. And he actually had given her substances to cause her to go down this road.
Suspicions about his role in Bobbi Kristina's condition circulate. And Nick Gordon is anxious to tell his side of the story.
So he books an interview with Dr. Phil. And it's an emotionally charged intervention. Soon afterwards, he enters rehab.
But 25-year-old Gordon reportedly leaves rehab after 7 weeks and moves back to Florida to live with his mother. Shortly after, on June 24, 2015, the court-appointed guardian of Bobbi Kristina's estate files a civil lawsuit against Nick Gordon for embezzling funds.
There was a transfer of over $11,000 from Bobbi Kristina's bank account into Nick Gordon's without any authorization.
But after 6 months, Bobbi Kristina still lingers in a coma without regaining consciousness.
She remained in a coma for a long time, and the family was feuding over what to do about keeping her alive or not.
But on July 26, 2015, the family makes the joint decision to take Bobbi Kristina off life support.
There was no chance of her regaining consciousness. There was no chance of reversing the brain damage. The family had to make a decision.
A police escort led the way as a gold-colored hearse carried the body of 22-year-old Bobbi Kristina to her final resting place, right next to her superstar mother, the late Whitney Houston.
I'm happy. She's with her mom now.
When Bobbi Kristina Brown died, the big shock again was that it wasn't a shock. We somehow expected tragedy to follow in the death of Whitney Houston.
Since Bobbi Kristina didn't have a will, the pressing question is, who stands to inherit Whitney Houston's estate? Nick Gordon and Bobbi Kristina reportedly called each other husband and wife.
If they were married, then Nick Gordon would have been, by law, entitled to the rest of the money that was owed from Whitney's estate to Bobbi Kristina when she died. This was a huge, huge bone of contention among the family. We are talking millions of dollars to this guy, Nick Gordon.
But Bobbi Brown reveals to the media that Gordon and Bobbi Kristina were never legally married. And in a startling development, Bobbi Kristina's court-appointed conservator amends the previous lawsuit against Gordon, now including a claim of wrongful death. The suit alleges that Gordon was legally responsible for what happened to Bobbi Kristina. That before she went into a coma, Gordon gave her a toxic cocktail, rendering her unconscious, and then put her face down in a tub of cold water, causing her to suffer brain damage. When her autopsy results are released, they determine that Bobbi Kristina died from complications caused by being immersed in water and drug intoxication. But they can't determine if her death was intentional or accidental. Despite this, A few months later, Nick Gordon is found liable for wrongful death.
In some ways, it brings a sense of justice to the family. Even though Nick Gordon was ordered to pay $36 million for causing the death of Bobbi Kristina, he never paid any of it because he didn't have it.
Stranger yet, he was found dead of a drug overdose in 2020, putting a horrible black ribbon on this horrible story.
But Bobbi Kristina's family gets some peace of mind when the court releases their decision on who will inherit her deceased mother's vast estate.
It was going to be Whitney's mother and her brothers that inherited her millions.
Despite the tragedy that came in the wake of Whitney Houston's untimely death, her music and talents continue to inspire. In June 2019, her estate inks an agreement with a boutique music and marketing company for 50% of the estate's assets. Sources estimate that the deal values Whitney's estate at $14 million.
Just recently, I heard her voice on the radio several times. She's not really gone. She's still with us, and she left a legacy of such tremendous music for us to continue to enjoy. She is a talent that transcends generation and time.
And her estate continues to generate income in new and exciting ways. In February 2020, the Whitney Houston Hologram Tour makes its world premiere in England. By utilizing body doubles and state-of-the-art CGI face mapping, the late pop princess will be able to entertain fans for generations to come.
And I think you'll see a lot of Whitney Houston in the future. Her family's already demonstrated they have an appetite to continue to allow the public to see her and experience her.
I hope that people remember that Whitney was human. You know, she is this icon, this star, this beautiful shining light. And it's tragic when you see those stars fall, but when you're given that God-given talent like Whitney had, that's what you hope that people remember.